The first sign of trouble wasn't the convoy of vehicles, though the endless stream of SUVs and campers certainly didn't help. No, the first real warning came in the form of an unnatural silence. The kind that blankets a place just before a storm hits. My land, usually buzzing with the hum of wind through pines and the distant call of hawks, was dead still that morning. I was sipping my black coffee on the porch of the old Firewatch cabin I'd restored myself, high up in the timbered ridges of northern Montana. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in the idea of peace. Blue sky, crisp air, no neighbors, no HOA, just me and my dogs, Titan and Shadow, dozing nearby. That's when the quiet cracked. The sound of tires crunching gravel echoed up from the winding dirt road that twisted its way from the state highway up to my property. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes, and that's when I saw them. SUVs, campers, even a repurposed school bus with streamers taped to the side. They just kept coming, like some kind of weird, overly enthusiastic parade of urbanites. One by one, they crested the final hill and rolled onto the lower meadow that made up the southern edge of my land. I counted at least 24 vehicles, each loaded with gear. Tents, coolers, folding chairs, even a couple of inflatable bounce houses strapped to roof racks. For a split second, I honestly wondered if I had missed some catastrophic news. Had the city been evacuated? Was there a wildfire? But then I saw her, Karen Whitmore. Even from a distance, I could recognize that blonde bobbing with every calculated step she took, clipboard clutched in one hand like a royal decree. She marched ahead of the pack like some HOA Napoleon leading her loyal troops to battle, her heels completely inappropriate for the terrain, but her ego apparently keeping her upright. She spotted me on the porch and waved like we were old friends, like this was just another barbecue between neighbors. "Good morning, Dylan," she chirped as she approached. "Isn't today just perfect?" I didn't answer. I simply stood, coffee still in hand, and stared at the chaos unraveling on my land. Tents were being pitched. Children were shrieking with delight. A portable generator was being unloaded from the back of a pickup truck. One woman was unwrapping a tray of deviled eggs like we were preparing for a 4th of July picnic. "What the hell is going on here?" I asked, not even bothering to hide the irritation in my voice. Karen beamed at me, her expression that perfect mix of condescension and fake charm. "Oh, didn't you get the email? The HOA board approved a weekend retreat. We wanted to host a family-friendly getaway, something that brings everyone together. And your land is just so perfect for it. Open, private, secluded. Because it's mine," I said, my voice flat. "Yes," she replied, not even blinking. "Exactly. That's why we chose it." I lowered my coffee cup slowly. "You chose my private land for a community event. Without asking. Without permission. Without so much as a post-it note." Karen let out a dismissive laugh. "Oh, Dylan, don't be so territorial. It's just a couple of days. You're part of the neighborhood, whether you like it or not. This is about unity." I stared at her. "I'm not part of the HOA, Karen. My property predates the neighborhood by 30 years. There's nothing in your charter that applies to me." Her smile faltered, just a touch. "Well, maybe not technically, but don't you think it's a bit selfish to have all this land and not share it?" I turned to look over the field. Some guy in board shorts was trying to light a grill under a leaning pine tree. 2 teenagers were hammering tent stakes into my fire break. A generator had already started humming, and music, bad music, drifted up the hill. "No," I said. "I don't." Karen stepped forward, lowering her voice, but not her attitude. "People took time off work, Dylan. Some of these families planned this for weeks. If you ask them to leave now, you're going to look like a reel." "I don't care how I look," I cut in. At that moment, a piercing scream rang out. "Oh my God, what is that smell?" Someone had stepped in a long-abandoned cow patty. Karen's eyes darted to the teenage girl now hopping around on one foot, trying to scrape her sandal clean. "There are no bathrooms," another voice cried. "This isn't a campsite," a man in a Hawaiian shirt bellowed, glancing nervously at a half-dug fire pit. Karen's bravado wavered. "It's just a little rustic," she offered, but her voice trembled. "You brought 100 strangers onto private property with no infrastructure, no permits, no sanitation. That's not rustic. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen." And still, she doubled down. "Well," she huffed, "the HOA voted, and it was unanimous. Democracy matters." I set my coffee cup down slowly and pulled my phone from my pocket. If you believe this is a democracy, I said, tapping the screen, then allow me to introduce you to the enforcement arm of my system. I hit send, and deep in the woods behind the cabin, a chain-link gate creaked open. They came fast. 6 sleek figures, all muscle and obedience, emerged from the shadows. Belgian Malinois, trained by me personally during my years with the Search and Rescue Division. Their black and tan coats shimmered as they bounded into formation. Titan, the alpha, stood at the front. His eyes locked on Karen like he'd just been given a target. A woman screamed. Someone dropped a folding chair. A man in cargo pants nearly tripped trying to grab his camera bag. Karen went pale. You brought attack dogs? I shrugged. They live here. They're trained not to act unless they're provoked. So maybe tell your guests not to provoke them. Titan barked once, deep and thunderous. A couple of kids started crying. The camping trip collapsed in under a minute. Tents were yanked down. Coolers dragged away. One guy abandoned his grill completely and ran for his Subaru. The woman with the deviled eggs upended the whole tray, trying to shove it into a tote bag. Karen, perched now on the hood of her Lexus, screamed, "I'm calling the police." I grinned and pulled out my phone again. Already did. As if on cue, 2 sheriff's cruisers turned the corner and rolled up the gravel path. Game over. But this was just the beginning. The sheriff's vehicles rolled to a stop with a crunch of gravel, red and blue lights casting warped reflections across the chrome of Karen's Lexus. Her triumphant smirk quickly melted into a grimace as the 2 deputies stepped out, one adjusting his duty belt, the other carrying a tablet and a clipboard. I stayed put on the porch. Titan and the rest of my dogs sat in a semicircle around me like a panel of furry judges. Karen, meanwhile, stumbled off the hood of her car, waving her clipboard in the air like it was some kind of legal talisman. "Officers," she cried, storming toward them with righteous indignation. "Thank God you're here. This man has released dangerous animals onto innocent people. Families. Children. All we wanted was a peaceful community event, and he unleashed them." The taller deputy, a square-jawed man with a steely mustache that looked straight out of a Western, glanced over at the dogs. Titan stared back, unblinking, posture relaxed, but coiled like a spring. The deputy turned to me. "Sir, you called in about a trespassing situation?" I nodded. "Yes. I never gave anyone permission to be here. My property line starts at that gate," I said, pointing toward the bent metal archway that Karen's parade of cars had bulldozed through earlier. "And as for the dogs," I gestured to the pack. "They're trained to guard the property. None of them have attacked anyone. Yet." The other deputy, a younger woman with sharp eyes and a demeanor that suggested she had little patience for nonsense, stepped toward Karen. "Ma'am, do you have written permission from the landowner to be here?" Karen blinked. "Well, I mean, we discussed it at the last HOA meeting. Everyone agreed it would be perfect for the retreat." "That's not what I asked," the deputy replied, her voice clipped. "Do you have written consent from the landowner? Signed documentation?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it, looked around wildly, clearly hoping some other poor soul would step forward to rescue her. But the crowd was silent, tense. Most of them were pretending to repack faster. A few had already started their engines. I turned toward my truck, opened the glove box, and retrieved a thick manila folder I had prepared years ago, just in case someone like Karen ever tried something stupid. I handed it to the male deputy, who flipped through the documents with practiced ease. "Deed to the land. Registered in your name. Survey map. No HOA easements. Zoning clearances." "Yep." He snapped the folder shut. "This land is privately owned and outside the HOA's jurisdiction." Karen's face contorted. "But he lives in the neighborhood. That means he's subject to HOA rules." "No," the female deputy said, her tone sharpening. "The HOA only applies to those who've signed and agreed to their covenants. This man's property predates your development. He never opted in. That means you, and everyone else here, are trespassing." Karen's composure finally cracked. She let out a strangled noise of frustration and stomped her foot like a petulant child denied dessert. But we planned this for weeks. People took time off. There's a whole itinerary." "That's not his problem," the male deputy said calmly. Then came the moment that sealed it. Titan, sensing the shift in energy, rose to his feet. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stood, and in doing so, cast a long, imposing shadow that stretched right up to Karen's shoes. She took one shaky step backward, her bravado now hanging by a thread. "You need to remove those beasts immediately," she shrieked. I didn't budge. They have as much right to be here as I do. Which is to say, all the right. The deputy fought back a grin. All right, folks, he called out to the remaining campers. You have 10 minutes to clear out. After that, we'll start writing citations. One per adult. Per violation. That got them moving. The meadow turned into a human ant farm. Campers scrambled to disassemble tents, yank power cords, and haul away piles of firewood. Someone tried to drag a half-built inflatable raft back to their trailer, only to trip over a forgotten cooler. One dad muttered bitterly about not even getting to roast marshmallows. Another mom was wrestling her toddler into a car seat while trying to keep from stepping in manure. Karen, meanwhile, wasn't ready to retreat. She spun on me, eyes blazing with fury. You think this is over? You've humiliated me in front of the entire neighborhood. I didn't flinch. No, Karen. You humiliated yourself. She leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. You're making a powerful enemy, Dylan. I leaned closer. Lady, I live alone, 10 miles from town, with 6 trained dogs and motion sensors on every tree. I am the powerful enemy. She blanched. This isn't over. You'll see. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed back to her SUV, slamming the door with a crack that echoed off the hills. The last few stragglers fled, leaving behind only tire ruts, trampled grass, and a half-crushed container of hummus someone had dropped during the exodus. The deputies lingered for a moment longer. The mustached one tipped his hat. Handled yourself well. I nodded. Thanks for backing me up. Let us know if it happens again, the female deputy added. Something tells me she's not done. They climbed back into their cruisers and disappeared down the road, leaving nothing but dust in their wake. I stood in the silence. My dog circled around me. Titan gave a low, satisfied huff and flopped down by the steps. Shadow nuzzled my leg, tail thumping once. I picked up my coffee, lukewarm now, and took a sip. It had gone cold, but I didn't care. I had one. My land was mine again. But even as I stood there, basking in the return of quiet, I knew Karen wasn't finished. I could feel it. The way the air still tingled with tension. The way she looked back one last time before driving off. She had that look. The look of someone planning. And sure enough, a few days later, the letter arrived. The letter arrived on a Thursday. Thick white envelope. County seal stamped in red ink right across the fold like a badge of bureaucracy. For a brief second, I thought it might be something about property taxes or a routine notice. But the moment I opened it and saw the phrasing, notice of inquiry, zoning and public safety complaint, I let out a slow, humorless laugh. So this was Karen's next move. She hadn't come back in person. No surprise there. Her dramatic exit in a storm of dust and embarrassment had burned that bridge. Instead, she decided to throw paper punches from a distance. Classic HOA maneuvering. When brute force fails, they try to bury you in paperwork. I read the letter again, more slowly this time, letting the absurdity sink in. Alleged misuse of land. Unsanctioned event hosting. Hazardous animals on property. Public safety violations. According to the letter, someone, wonder who, had filed a formal complaint with the county zoning office, suggesting that my property was being used in a way inconsistent with community safety and environmental harmony. Karen had even included the word harmony. That was her little HOA neighborhood's name, Harmony Ridge Estates. I imagined her typing it in with perfectly manicured fingers, lips pursed in smug triumph, confident that this time, she had me. Unfortunately for Karen, I'd seen this playbook before. Back when I was still working with state-level wilderness operations, we dealt with private property rights all the time. Public encroachment. Disputed boundaries. Overzealous community associations trying to turn private land into shared space by filing enough complaints to draw attention. I had anticipated something like this. Maybe not this fast, but I was ready. First thing I did was pull up every document I had. Land deed. Historical maps. Boundary surveys from 3 different years. Even a notarized letter from the previous owner, my Uncle Frank, who made it explicitly clear that the property was never, has never been, and will never be subject to any shared HOA use. Then I plugged in the trail cams. Next came the phone call. I reached out to a guy I'd worked with years ago, Tom Enfield, former zoning consultant turned private land rights specialist. The kind of guy who knew how to dismantle this sort of HOA nonsense with surgical precision. After a few minutes of catching up and swapping minor horror stories, Tom agreed to meet me at the county office the following Tuesday. Said I wouldn't need a lawyer, not for something this stupid, but that having someone familiar with zoning law might add weight. And it did. When I arrived at the county building, jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt still dusted with pine needles. Karen was already there, dressed like she was headed to a White House luncheon. Pearl earrings, blazer that probably cost more than my chainsaw, and a binder so thick it looked like it could kill a small raccoon if dropped from a modest height. She smirked when she saw me, a silent smirk. One of those slow, condescending facial stretches that screams checkmate. I just nodded politely and sat down across the room, stretching my legs and giving her a view of the mud on my boots. When the clerk called our names, she practically leapt up. I followed at a steady pace, Tom behind me, wearing khakis and a windbreaker, clipboard in hand like some suburban exorcist. Inside, the meeting room was small. Wood-paneled walls. A single table with 3 chairs on either side. At the center sat a county compliance officer, mid-50s, balding, glasses halfway down his nose, surrounded by a swamp of folders and a state-issued laptop that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2009. He didn't smile. "Let's keep this short," he said. "Ms. Whitmore, you filed the complaint?" Karen sat up straighter. "Yes, sir. I'm here representing Harmony Ridge Estates. Our community has grave concerns regarding Mr. Parker's land use. There have been incidents involving aggressive animals, unauthorized events, and an overall disregard for community harmony." I blinked. She actually used the word grave. Specifically, she continued, flipping through her binder with theatrical flair, he allowed large, dangerous canines to roam freely among families, constructed unregistered structures, and, most alarmingly, refused HOA access to shared spaces. The compliance officer raised an eyebrow. Shared spaces? Karen cleared her throat. "Well, the land is adjacent to Harmony Ridge, and many of our residents have grown accustomed to using the southern clearing for walking and gatherings. It's customary." I couldn't help myself. I let out a soft chuckle. The officer turned to me. "Mr. Parker, your response?" I slid my own folder across the table. "That's a copy of the property deed, zoning history, boundary surveys, and a police report from last weekend." He opened it and started reading. Tom leaned forward. "The property in question," Tom said smoothly, "is privately owned, fully fenced, and marked with no trespassing signs. It has never been under HOA control. The animals in question are trained security dogs, registered with the county. And the so-called event? That was an unauthorized invasion. A trespass. Dozens of vehicles entered the land without permission." The compliance officer kept reading. Karen's smile was thinning. I added, "The police who responded confirmed that I was the rightful property owner and that the dogs never touched a single person. They were leashed or held in command the entire time." Karen made a strangled sound. "You're twisting things. You intimidated people with attack dogs." Tom raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, would you like to provide evidence that the dogs attacked anyone?" Karen went quiet. The officer finally closed the folder. He rubbed his temples, clearly exhausted by the nonsense. "Ms. Whitmore," he said slowly, "the county appreciates citizen concerns. But this land is not part of your HOA. It's privately owned and documented as such. There are no violations, no misuse, no environmental hazard, and certainly no obligation to open private land for community use, regardless of tradition or expectation." Karen's cheeks flushed bright pink. "But he's making it impossible to maintain a sense of unity. You don't understand how disruptive this is to our community." The compliance officer gave her a long, level look. "That's not our concern. And if I may suggest, filing baseless complaints could put you at risk of a counterclaim." Her mouth snapped shut. She stood suddenly, her chair screeching against the linoleum, binder clutched to her chest like a shield. "This isn't over," she hissed at me as she passed. "You haven't heard the last of me." I didn't respond. Just waited until the door clicked shut behind her. The officer sighed. "I'm sorry you had to come in for this." I nodded. "Not your fault. But I appreciate the clarity. You'll get a written dismissal in the mail," he said. "And if she tries again, you let us know." Outside, Karen's SUV screeched out of the parking lot like a getaway car. Tom and I stood on the steps, watching her disappear into traffic. "She's going to try something else," Tom muttered. I nodded. "Let her. I'm not going anywhere." That night, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, I sat on the porch again. Titan rested at my feet. Shadow was curled up by the woodpile, ears twitching in her sleep. My coffee steamed in my hand. The wind rustled the pines. For now, it was quiet. But I had no illusions. Karen wasn't finished. And neither was I. For a week, everything was still. The dogs resumed their patrols like usual. I chopped wood, fixed the northern fence where an elk had pushed through, and even spent a quiet afternoon recaulking the cabin windows before Winter could find a crack to slip through. No cars. No letters. No Karen. But peace is a fragile thing in a place where petty power thrives. On a cold Tuesday morning, the stillness cracked again. I was restocking the barn when I heard the crunch of gravel, slow, deliberate. Not the chaotic stampede from last time. Just one black SUV, creeping down the hill like a predator. Unmarked. Tinted windows. Government plates. My stomach didn't twist. It settled. Cold and calm. I'd seen this tactic before. The SUV parked just inside the property line, right in front of the sign that said, private land. No trespassing, state verified. The doors opened in unison. 3 men stepped out. Khakis, windbreakers, clipboards. The tallest one flashed a badge so fast I barely saw it. "Mr. Dylan Parker," he called out. "We're conducting a federal environmental compliance check. Received reports of unsafe land use and the presence of aggressive, unlicensed animals. We'll need access to the property." I didn't answer right away. Just stood at the barn door, wiping grease from my hands with a rag, letting the silence settle. "Did you bring a warrant?" I finally asked. The lead man shook his head. "Not necessary under Section 402. This is a preliminary assessment." I almost smiled. There was no Section 402. At least not one that gave federal agents open access to private land without consent or probable cause. They were bluffing. Worse, they were impersonating federal officers. I stepped forward slowly, my phone already recording in my back pocket. "I assume you have identification?" The second man produced a laminated card that said Environmental Field Examiner with no department seal. The logo was pixelated, like it had been printed from Google Images. "Which agency sent you?" I pressed. The lead agent tensed. "We're subcontracted by the county, working with federal partners." I gave a tight nod, pretending to accept the answer. "Great. Then you'll be fine waiting while I confirm." I stepped back inside the barn and shut the door behind me. Inside, I went straight for the secure box. Not a weapon, though those were nearby, but a metal case containing 2 essentials: a satellite uplink and a hand-signed affidavit from an old friend at the Department of Agriculture, confirming this land's federal protection due to a rare subspecies of hawk nesting near the ridge. Another layer of legal defense I'd filed long ago. 10 minutes later, I walked back out, phone in one hand, the folder in the other. "You're not real agents," I said flatly. "You're private contractors. And this isn't an inspection. It's harassment." They shifted, visibly uncomfortable. "I've confirmed with the county," I continued. "No one sent you. And this." I held up the ID card. "This is impersonation of a federal officer. That's a felony." The third man, the youngest, took a step back. "We were just hired to document." "By Karen Whitmore," I interrupted. They didn't answer, but that told me everything. "I'm going to ask you once," I said, voice low and calm. "Leave my land. Right now? Or I'll have the sheriff out here in 5 minutes, and your company's name will be in a federal report by sunset." The lead man hesitated. Then he nodded once, sharply. They left. I watched the SUV snake back down the road, gravel spitting from their tires. 10 minutes later, I was on the phone with the sheriff. 20 after that, 2 cruisers showed up. We reviewed the footage together. Every second of the encounter, recorded from the barn camera, the driveway camera, and the tiny clip-on mic in my collar that I rarely used but never forgot. "Jesus," the sheriff muttered, rubbing his jaw. "You weren't kidding. They faked a federal badge." "Karen's escalating," I replied. "Yeah, and now she's skirting federal lines. This is bad." He took the footage and promised it would go straight to the DA. Said the impersonation charge could carry prison time if they pushed it. At minimum, the company behind the stunt, if it even existed, was about to be on every blacklist this side of the Rockies. Still, I knew Karen wouldn't stop. She was losing, and people like her don't go down gracefully. That night, I walked the fence line alone. The wind had picked up, howling through the pine tops. Titan followed behind me, ears perked, every sense alert. I could feel his tension matching mine, like the whole forest knew something was coming. At the northern ridge, I paused. Over the valley, the lights of Harmony Ridge twinkled like a painting. On the surface, it looked peaceful, serene. But beneath the rooftops, I knew she was plotting. I leaned against a post and looked out at the mountains beyond. Karen had tried noise. She'd tried trespass, then manipulation, then paperwork, now impersonation. Next, I wasn't sure, but I had a sinking feeling it would be bigger, bolder, and far more reckless. She didn't just want access. She wanted control. And when people like Karen can't get what they want, they set fires, real or metaphorical. But I wasn't afraid of fire. I had extinguishers, and I had receipts. I should have known she'd go that far. 3 days after the fake inspection, the scent of smoke woke me before the sun did. Not the cozy kind that comes from a neighbor's fireplace. This was sharp, acrid, and far too close. I sat bolt upright, eyes scanning the shadows as Titan growled low beside me. Outside, the wind carried smoke from the east ridge. I bolted for the porch. In the dim gray of morning, the sky was already blushing orange, not from the sunrise, but from fire. There was a line of flames licking their way up the slope behind the northern tree line. It wasn't spreading fast, yet, but it was enough to set every alarm off in my head. I raced to the barn, grabbed my emergency gear, radio, extinguisher packs, shovel, boots. I kept a small ATV ready for terrain like this. Within 2 minutes, I was tearing up the path toward the flames, Titan running beside me like a ghost of war. When I reached the site, it was clear someone had ignited a pile of brush. But not just brush, it had been arranged. Accelerant had been used. I recognized the dark chemical staining on the ground, the too clean burn at the core of the blaze. This wasn't an accident. Someone set this fire deliberately, and I had a damn good guess who was behind it. But what Karen hadn't realized, what no one in Harmony Ridge seemed to know, was that this particular patch of land wasn't just mine. It was registered under a federal conservation grant. 3 years earlier, I discovered a small nesting population of northern ridge hawks, a rare bird species thought to have vanished from this part of Montana. I'd reported it, filed paperwork, and eventually been awarded a preservation contract. My land wasn't just private, it was monitored, protected, watched. Which meant, so was this fire. A blinking red light on the nearest pine confirmed it. One of the 3 motion-activated wildlife cameras had captured the entire thing. Whoever did this hadn't seen it. And that camera didn't just record wildlife, it recorded everything. I didn't touch the fire, didn't stomp it out. I called the ranger division directly. Then I called the sheriff. And then finally, I called Tom. Karen's done playing fair, I told him. She just tried to burn me out. 2 hours later, a team of wildland fire marshals and county sheriffs stood on my land, shaking their heads as they reviewed the camera footage. It was crystal clear. 3 people, arriving on foot under cover of night. 2 carrying jugs. 1 holding a phone for light. The third person, the tallest, stepped into full view of the camera as they poured liquid across the base of the brush pile. It was Karen, hair tied back, wearing black, clipboard in hand. She had documented the whole thing like she was staging a damn performance. One of her assistants even posed beside the brush before lighting the match. By noon, the sheriff had seen enough. They issued a warrant before she could even get back from Pilates. At 3:27 p.m., Karen Whitmore was arrested in her driveway. Her neighbors watched from behind curtains as deputies cuffed her and placed her into the back of a cruiser. The charges? Criminal trespassing, destruction of protected land, arson of federal conservation property, felony impersonation, tied to her earlier inspection, and just for good measure, obstruction of a conservation investigation. I watched the arrest from my porch through binoculars, sipping fresh brewed coffee while Titan sat beside me like a statue. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, not exactly. It was relief, closure, the quiet understanding that justice didn't need to be loud. It just needed time. 2 weeks passed. The neighborhood changed. Karen's name was scrubbed from the HOA board. Her property was quietly put up for sale. Her allies fell silent. And for the first time in years, no one parked outside my fence. No more flyers. No more friendly visits. Harmony Ridge had learned its lesson. I attended Karen's first hearing, not because I needed to, but because I wanted her to see I wasn't afraid. She avoided my eyes the whole time. The judge denied bail. The prosecutor laid out the video footage frame by frame, and I heard the gasp ripple through the gallery when Karen's face filled the monitor. They say she may serve 5 to 7 years. Possibly more, depending on federal charges. I still walk my land each morning. Still check the fence lines. Still keep the cameras running. But the tension is gone now. The dogs are calmer. I sleep better. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I hear the hawks calling overhead, gliding through the clean air above the ridge that nearly burned. They don't know they were in danger, but I do. And I'll never let it happen again. This land is mine. Not because of a title. Not because of a deed. but because I stood my ground against lies, intimidation, and even fire. Karen came for it all, and she lost.